All right. Well, I think we should get started. We've got kind of a full town hall for you this evening. Thanks everyone for dropping your name and location in the chat. Let's go ahead and get started. This is a virtual town hall and about the fight to save Ash Meadows. So tonight we're really going to get into the twists and turns of this fight over the last 10 months or so, the highs, the lows, and to really, I think, just update some folks on what the AC is doing in this fight, and especially how you can help us with where we're at right now in this campaign. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Mason Vale. I'm the executive director for the AC, and I've been the ED for the last 2 years. And this fight has taken up a good half of that tenure now almost. So that's who I am, and I'm joined by two members of our board of directors, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Fraga. I'm the treasurer for the Amargosa Conservancy. I've been on the board since 2016. I'm also a botanist who studies plants there, and I work at the California Botanic Garden.
Hi, I'm Patrick Donnelly. I'm the vice president of the Amargosa Conservancy Board of Directors. I've been serving on the board for a couple of years now, and I was actually the executive director many years ago. But now I work at the Center for Biological Diversity. I'm our Great Basin director, and I live right here in Shoshone, California, on the Amargosa River.
Well, let's dive in, folks. We've got, like I said, a pretty full town hall today. We're gonna, walk you through sort of the campaign right now and leave plenty of time throughout for questions. But here's, I want to open with just an acknowledgement that our organization is working towards a sustainable future for the Amargosa Basin, and we do so in full recognition that this area is the ancestral homelands of the Timbisha Shoshone, Southern Paiute, and Niue peoples. Here is what we're going to do today. So we're going to start with really talking about and sort of just reminding folks what Ash Meadows is, right? That's really what this campaign is centered on, and why we should care so deeply about it. Then we're going to talk about the campaign to date, how this fight to save the refuge, this most recent fight began, starting with Rover Metals' Let's Go Lithium project. And then we're going to talk you through what's happened after last summer, sort of how this has been a wake-up call for us here at the Amargosa Conservancy and in the region to the vulnerability still facing the refuge. And then to talk about really where we think we're headed next, which is the urgent need for a mineral withdrawal. And if that's a new phrase, don't worry, we're going to really talk through and break down what that means. And then we're going to talk about Rover Metals Project 2.0, sort of a recent update in the ongoing saga against that particular project. So we are the Amargosa Conservancy. If you're not familiar with our organization, we've been working in the watershed for 20 years towards a sustainable future for the river and basin through the pillars of science, stewardship, and advocacy. So let's start with Ash Meadows and what it is. It's really hard to overstate how spectacular and special Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge is, located here in southern Nevada, right on the state line border, and we'll have a map coming up that shows that. But as I said, this is the ancestral homelands of several tribes in the region, the Timbisha Shoshone, Southern Paiute, and Chemehuevi tribes. Ash Meadows is 24,000 acres of extremely unique spring-fed wetlands, sloughs, and desert lands. It's the largest oasis in the Mojave Desert, and it's situated right against the boundary of Death Valley National Park. So it's quite extraordinary. It's been protected now as a refuge since 1984, and the reason there's an exclamation point there is it's 2024. So 40 years ago, Ash Meadows earned its status as a protected refuge after a number of conflicts that really pose existential risks to the refuge. It's also a Ramsar wetland of international importance, and this might be an unfamiliar designation, but it's truly a special one. This is a convention under the United Nations, and Ash Meadows was actually the fourth wetland in the United States to receive that recognition. So it is a globally significant biodiversity hotspot. One of the key features that we here at the Amargosa Conservancy love and care about, and this is shared in common for many in the region, is the spring pools you find at Ash Meadows. It's really emblematic of what the Amargosa is, and what makes it so special are these stretches of open fossil water. This is water that in some cases is over 7,000 years old, now being expressed in this wetland complex. And we think about these as windows into an ancient world because they are in some ways these relics, these remnants of a bygone age in the Amargosa, and they are the reason Ash Meadows is so special. Without this, there really is no Ash Meadows. The water is the lifeblood of the entire Amargosa Basin, and nowhere is that more true than at Ash Meadows. We often nickname the refuge the Galapagos of the desert. It is, again, an extremely significant biodiversity hotspot, home to at least 26 endemic species. And endemic species only live in one place. They're found in one location. I say at least because we're actually discovering new species that we believe to be endemic to the refuge pretty consistently. And 12 of those species are currently protected under the Endangered Species Act as threatened or endangered. This is the highest local concentration of endemic species, or the second highest rather, in North America, the first highest in the United States. And it's right here in Southern Nevada. So it's an extraordinary landscape for that reason. And I want to turn it over to Naomi to really talk about the work that she's doing with some of the rare plant species that are find their home in Ash Meadows.
Thank you, Mason. Yeah, I'm so happy to share a little bit about the incredible plant diversity that we find in Ash Meadows. As Mason said, these springs are a window into an ancient world when the climate was wetter and cooler. And these plants persist here today because of this fossil water. And so they hold on in these very special refuges. So the plants of Ash Meadows live in this land of quote unquote extremes. And so we think of it as an extreme environment because it is very hot and dry. In modern times, the modern day precipitation is fairly low, and Ash Meadows averages at about 4 inches a year. It's also very alkaline. There's high mineral content and salt concentrations, and that's in part due to a lot of the dissolved minerals in the water, high rates of evaporation, leaving behind lots of salts in the soil. And so this makes for a very extreme environment for most plant life, where these plants have to have special adaptations. So they're highly specialized plants that are adapted to this very unique environment. And we find some incredibly beautiful flora in this region. And I have a photo slide here just showing you a few. All of these plants are considered rare, and some of them are endemic. So the Ash Meadows gum plant, its namesake is the Ash Meadows gum plant because it only lives in Ash Meadows and nowhere else in the world. It extends a little bit into California, but really its habitat is reliant upon this water that comes to the surface in the Ash Meadows region. We have these crystal pools, and here we can see, that water coming to the surface, but really beyond these pools, there's lots of groundwater expression, and sometimes we see very lush and verdant vegetation forming along streams, and mesquite forests and ash tree forests, and it's incredibly special. And then sometimes we see environments that to the untrained eye might seem dry. So for instance, this photograph here to the right, the ground looks dry, but the plants that are living there are all wetland plants, indicating that the water is right there at the very surface, like very close, very high groundwater table. And so sometimes while we don't see the water expressed, we understand through our studies that these are wetland plants that are relying upon this ancient groundwater. And so this is just the outflow from Ash Meadows, actually photograph taken just over the state border in California, just showing that the water that comes to the surface at Ash Meadows travels well beyond the refuge and feeds life. The life abounds just outside of the refuge as well. And here in this habitat shot, also to the untrained eye, this might look just like a field of salt. But here, these little brown areas are actually a endemic plant called the Amargosa nightwort, which lays very low to the ground. It's a very highly specialized plant that lives in these saline and very wet environment. So if you were to feel around in the soil here, you would see that the soil is actually saturated with water, even though you don't see any water expressed at the surface. So it's a very special, unique environment that supports very unusual plants that only live in this corner of the world. And so here are some of the very rare plants of Ash Meadows. So very rare endemic plants are supported by this wetland, including the Amargosa nightwort. So that's a close-up photo. You can see it greener and with its beautiful little pink flowers. We also have an orchid that is very specific to this environment, the Ash Meadows lady's tresses. And one of my favorite plants that I've been doing a lot of research on, the spring-loving centaury with its beautiful pink flowers and little twisty stamens that produce pollen. So there are 11 plants that we consider to be restricted to the Ash Meadows region or are nearly restricted to this region in the Amargosa Basin. And 7 of them are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And that's to recognize that these plants are incredibly vulnerable, that they have high threat impact in part because of the threats to the groundwater. And so that is the primary threat. The primary threat to all these species is depletion of the groundwater because it is an essential resource upon which they rely, and it is scarce. And we know that modern day precipitation does not feed the groundwater table as what was occurring about 10,000 years ago. And so any draw on that water, poses a threat to these species. And so Ash Meadows really is an incredible reservoir for biodiversity. It has been a refuge in a changing climate from the Pleistocene, that ice age, to the modern day Holocene. These plants have persisted in this region and have adapted to this increasing aridity. And so protecting their groundwater is essential to ensuring that they can continue to survive in this region. And that's why in part, the plants are part of what make Ash Meadows so special, and really clues us into why this groundwater is so important here. So that's what I have for you all today. Oh, stop.
Thanks, Naomi. I'll take the screen share back here and try to get my presentation. There we go. So, I mean, that's just such a great overview, especially of the plant species and how remarkable this place is. You know, Ash Meadows is infamous for other species as well, namely that bottom right picture is of the devil's hole pupfish, and this is considered to be the rarest or one of the rarest fish species on the planet, and arguably the most endangered. It actually lives in a single spring in Ash Meadows, but that spring is managed by the National Park Service. And if you've heard of, one species in the Amargosa, it's probably the devil's hole pupfish, because it's had an outsized impact on really how groundwater has been managed in that basin for several decades. It's also important to recognize, of course, we as the conservation organization care deeply about the conservation values, but the Amargosa Basin and the Ash Meadows region is also a place to call home for many communities. The entire basin is home to some 40,000 people across these communities of Beatty, Pahrump, Crystal, Amargosa Valley, and then also on the California side in Furnace Creek, Shoshone, Tecopa, and Charleston View. And this has been a place called home by the First Peoples for a long time and continues to be. And one thing that these communities share fundamentally in common with every species of wildlife that is endemic to the region is they depend on groundwater as well for their lives and livelihoods. So let's now talk about this newest threat to the refuge and really how this whole fight kicked off. This started last year, right around, it was early summer, about May, where we became aware of this project proposed by a Canadian mining company called Rover Metals, who had visions to do exploratory drilling against the northern boundary of Ash Meadows. And this is what the original proposal consisted of. They were intending to drill up to 30 boreholes to 250 or 300 feet in depth. Several of those borehole locations were going to become quite close to the refuge, within 2,000 feet of Fairbanks Spring, which is pictured here in the middle, which is home to 2 endangered species of fish. We have the Ash Meadows Amargosa pupfish and the Ash Meadows speckled dace. And those are both, of course, endemic to the refuge as well. And we were deeply concerned about this exploratory project for multiple reasons. Exploration is first and foremost a pathway towards the creation of something bigger. It's often the first step towards the creation of what could be an open pit mine against the northern boundary of the refuge. So that was deeply concerning. But the exploratory drilling itself was not risk-free, in our opinion. drilling boreholes to that kind of depth in an area where, based on monitoring wells, we know groundwater is quite shallow. We know that groundwater is actively feeding these springs in the northern part of the refuge. And so we had serious concerns about what could happen if one of those boreholes were to go terribly wrong, if groundwater were to be impacted, and something would change hydrologically that could have permanent and irreversible impacts on those downstream springs and endangered species. So this was a huge alarm for us, and we at that time really had our only recourse was to apply a tremendous amount of public pressure, because the BLM was treating this as what's called a notice level project, meaning that the company had in their opinion the ability just to submit the proper paperwork for their project. As long as they were disturbing fewer than 5 acres, the regulations say that they're free to go ahead and do their exploratory drilling. But in this case, we had to say this posed an exceptional risk in light of its potential to impact groundwater relied upon by endangered species in the refuge. And so that launched a full-blown campaign. This is just a map of where that original project proposal was pitched. The green portion here is Ash Meadows. The surrounding orange portion, the gradient portion, is actually an area of critical environmental concern managed by the BLM. And then the black box on top is the exploration area where Rover Metals is looking to do their exploratory drilling. And these red icons represented where the original boreholes were going to occur. So this was deeply, deeply concerning, not only for us, but for the communities of the region. And what resulted was, I should also mention that simultaneously, Rover Metals produced images of where a future open pit mine could be created. And that's drawn in this orange outline here. You'll see at the bottom part of the screen that, the sort of dark splotches area, that's the refuge. And Fairbanks Spring is located in that northernmost part. So you can see just how close they would be willing to pursue this kind of development in proximity to the refuge. And so we really had no choice but to throw everything we had to try to at least see this project slowed down, to give us as a community a chance to really engage meaningfully. So what that resulted in was a really robust public support campaign. We ended up drafting and submitting a letter that was supported by the Timbish-Shoshone tribe, 23 nonprofit partners. Thanks to many people that I'm sure in this room, we were able to send 1,500 letters from concerned citizens, raising the alarm, asking the Department of the Interior not to permit this project without a far more robust environmental review process. Letters were also sent by Beatty Town Advisory Boards and Amargosa Valley Town Board. Those are the local community boards in this region. Hydrological analysis work was conducted on behalf of the Nature Conservancy to really analyze the risks that exploratory drilling would pose or could pose to the refuge if allowed to proceed according to Rover's plans. And that was hugely influential in shaping the agency's mindset around the real risk this did pose. That was all the public pressure side of the campaign, but we also, because of the urgency of the situation, at a certain point, we thought we were within 48 hours of Rover Metals conducting their drilling. And that would have been, irreversible. There's really no coming back from that. So we also had to resort to a legal strategy. And I want to just invite Patrick to speak to really what that legal strategy consisted of, and ultimately what agreement came out of that continues to be formative for how we're proceeding here.
So once the plans of Rover became clear and it started looking like they were going to be out there drilling within a week at one point, we filed lawsuit against BLM. And of course, the Center for Biological Diversity suing BLM happens on a weekly basis, so that's nothing new. But Amargosa Conservancy joining the lawsuit was new. The AC had never sued anybody before, but we felt like this was the board of directors felt like this was a really serious enough risk to the Amargosa that it warranted that extraordinary action. So attorneys from my organization, the Center, as well as the Western Mining Action Project in Colorado, had the lead filing this lawsuit. We were basically alleging that, as Mason explained, the exploration project had been filed under what's called a notice, which is allowable if a project's going to impact less than 5 acres of land. However, there are a number of criteria under which a notice level project is not allowable. In other words, even if you're going to impact less than 5 acres, if it reaches several criteria, then it automatically will need to be bumped up to the next level, even if it is less than 5 acres. And one of those criteria is, will it impact lands or waters that contain endangered species? Now, the connection between ground and surface water from a legal sense is not always well recognized. You know, I think in a system like the Amargosa, in systems of groundwater dependent ecosystems across the American West, you know, the connections between ground and surface water are very well established. At a legal sense, it's a little dicier. There's a famous court ruling, Winters, which helped outline the understanding of groundwater as it relates to Federal Reserve water rights. And so there is some precedent for that. But anyway, so we filed this lawsuit basically saying, you know, if this project is going to impact waters that contain endangered species, which ultimately the groundwater, when it comes to the surface, contains endangered species, then a notice is not an appropriate processing type for this project, and it needs a plan of operations, which is a more full disclosure of the project and its parameters, as well as environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And that's what our lawsuit alleged. We felt very strong about our prospects here. You know, as the date of the drilling drew near, we ended up filing a motion for preliminary injunction, which is sort of a urgent appeal to a judge to stop this thing in its tracks while the court case plays out. In the end, you know, BLM, I believe, knew darn well they were going to lose their lawsuit, and so they ended up withdrawing the approval of Rover's notice. So they had approved Rover's notice, which basically gave Rover the green light to move ahead with their exploration project, and BLM withdrew that approval and basically said, you know, you're going to need to file a plan of operations and do environmental analysis under NEPA. Because, and they cited the very reasons we outlined in our lawsuit. So apparently BLM and their attorneys agreed with us. The lawsuit then resolved shortly thereafter. You know, there were still some outstanding issues about BLM having approved the thing anyway that we were interested in litigating from a sort of legal precedential standpoint, as opposed to the actual Rover project, given its status. However, we ended up settling the lawsuit with BLM to dismiss it in exchange for getting notification of new plans of operation or notices, exploration notices, within 5 miles of Ash Meadows for the next year. This is actually, it sounds like nothing, but it's actually very, very helpful because tracking notice level exploration at BLM is notoriously difficult. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go to a BLM office and start rooting around in paper files. Much of this is done on paper, and you know, taking cell phone photos of hundreds of pages of paper files trying to track down exploration projects. So actually getting advance notice of NOIs and plans of operation within 5 miles of Ash Meadows for the next year is certainly very helpful for us in terms of holding BLM and the mining companies accountable for what's going on out there. So we felt really good about the outcome of this lawsuit. You know, we stopped Rover in their tracks. That was, you know, incremental success. You know, I think a lot of times in this line of work, you say that a delay is a win. And, you know, we held off Rover long enough that now we're able to really develop this campaign in a more robust fashion and pursue some of the other elements that that Mason's going to talk about here.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And, you know, ultimately the big kind of crescendo for that original push was that July 19th announcement that the BLM was rescinding their approval of the project and requiring that plan of operations. And I first and foremost want to thank, you know, the members that are hopefully here tonight. This was an extremely compressed campaign. This all unfolded over about 2.5 months, you know, not much more than that. And, you know, I was really, really, you know, heartened by the response that our membership gave in terms of, you know, signing that petition. I mean, actions like that are extremely valuable in these high pressure moments. So thank you everyone for showing up for us. I mean, that was, really vital to this victory. So that after this announcement that the project would at least be halted, we kind of took a small breath and we're waiting to see what would happen next. The public backlash against this project was so significant. We really wondered if Rover Metals would have an appetite to push it forward, and more on that in a moment. But it was also, I think, a really important opportunity for us as an organization and collectively as a conservation community, and just broadly a community. It was a wake-up call to the continued vulnerability of Ash Meadows. The fact that this project was able to come, really so close to actually happening was extraordinary. I think we, in some ways, take for granted when we, put a protective designation on a landscape that is protected in perpetuity. But in the case of Ash Meadows, being a fundamentally groundwater dependent refuge, it is vulnerable to impacts beyond its designated borders. And I think that's what this kind of woke us up to. So that since that time, we've really been investigating strategies that would meaningfully enhance the durability of the protected status that the refuge already has. And that means protecting the groundwater that sustains it. And, we also were kind of woken up to the fact that even though Rover Metals was really the first company to come in and try to develop mineral claims so close to the refuge, they certainly won't be the last. This map actually lays out all of the load and placer claims currently registered on these lands surrounding the refuge. And so you can see really just how dire the situation truly is in terms of the potential for many of these claims to be developed in such a way that would be, really, really at odds with a durable conservation strategy for the refuge. And so that was kind of the question, like what comes next in this fight to save Ash Meadows? And after a lot of conversations with the local communities, especially in terms of addressing their concerns and what they would like to see happen next, we think we've identified a path that will, at least in the short term, allow us to get out ahead of some of these projects like Rover's that will continue to follow if something doesn't change in terms of how the BLM lands around the refuge are managed. And so where we've landed is on a need for a mineral withdrawal. And a mineral withdrawal is essentially a process through which a specified defined area of federally owned public lands, in this case managed by the BLM, is either temporarily or permanently withdrawn from mineral entry. And what that means is no new mining claims can be filed in a withdrawn area. It generally does not affect existing valid claims, so claims are already established. Generally speaking, this is not going to have an impact on those claims. But what it will do is prevent new claims from being filed that could be developed in a similar fashion. And this kind of process is typically done to protect particular values, such as environmental, cultural, or recreational interests, all of which we think are more than present in abundance around Ash Meadows. And so this is the path we've identified. It is not a final destination by any means. In some ways, this is one of the more minimal interventions we could seek in terms of safeguarding the refuge, but it would be a meaningful first step towards what we hope would be a longer term process towards really making more robust the protections of Ash Meadows through protecting that groundwater. So how do these things happen? Who has the authority to actually conduct a mineral withdrawal? This can be done in basically two ways. The Department of the Interior, which of course, under which is the BLM, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, actually has the authority to do this. They can withdraw lands from mineral entry based on an application that's submitted by the managing agency or agencies plural. In this case, regarding lands around Ash Meadows, the way this process could work, and we hope will work, is the Bureau of Land Management would submit an application either alone as an individual agency or in collaboration with the Fish and Wildlife Service, who manages the refuge, and or the National Park Service, who manages the Devil's Hole. And these co-applying agencies would then submit an application to the Secretary of the Interior, who then would consider it. And administrative mineral withdrawals like these done through the Department of the Interior are always temporary. In this case, for BLM lands, they would last 20 years before they would need to be renewed. So again, not a permanent fix to the threat to groundwater resources that mining and mining activities continue to pose to the refuge, but it would meaningfully reduce the level of current interest in developing mining claims in this area. Mineral withdrawals can also be secured separately through an act of legislation introduced and passed by Congress and then signed into law by the president. And those can actually result in permanent withdrawals. And so we see both of these processes play out across the West in different situations. In this case, we really feel that based on the current threat posed to the refuge, we would like to see the Department of the Interior really take the lead on this process and at minimum help secure that 20-year withdrawal to prevent new claims from being filed in the Ash Meadows region. Now, that's really the technical pathways for how this works under the authority of these different entities. A more meaningful question, and I think a more important question, is how do these actually happen? And mineral withdrawals require the following. They require robust scientific analysis. We need to be able to demonstrate scientifically why allowing new claims to be filed presents a threat to the refuge. And so in an effort to establish this, and actually a hydrological study is currently underway, analyzing potential impacts to groundwater from mining activities on public lands managed by the BLM surrounding Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. They're considering really the hydrographic basin that Ash Meadows is a part of as the study area. And the results of that study are going to be used to really inform a proposed mineral withdrawal boundary area, one that really aligns with our understanding of the science on the ground. So that is currently in the works. The other way that mineral withdrawals happen is through strong public support. This is a fairly large undertaking for the agency, or of course for Congress, to get a process like this in motion, to dedicate the resources and staff needed to put the application together, and then to also administer the various public involvement and participation processes that follow. These generally go through the National Environmental Policy Act process, and that's where the public can actually comment on what they would like to see considered. And so that requires significant resources, which means it's really it's imperative that the public shows strong support for this action, especially at the local and grassroots level, but not exclusively so. As I kind of laid out at the start of this presentation, Ash Meadows has a really significant special status regionally, nationally, internationally, as a wetland of extreme importance. And so we are hoping to secure as strong public support from every corner that we can to really demonstrate the need and desire to see the agencies work on an application and getting it through that process. And that's frankly where you all come in. We have a petition set up on our website that is really an opportunity for you to voice your support for this mineral withdrawal process for these sensitive lands surrounding Ash Meadows. All of those will be compiled and submitted to decision makers both in Congress and the Department of the Interior. And the more we can show that support, especially from those that live here in the region, in the Amargosa Basin and beyond, the stronger chance we have at really motivating decision makers to get this process in motion urgently. So that's where we're really counting on you all. I'm going to ask, maybe Naomi already has, but we have a link to the petition that will be dropped into the chat. It takes less than a minute to fill out. I encourage you to read it though. And please, of course, always reach out to us with questions, but the more you can do to help share that petition, the better right now. This is really a critical moment for that show of public support. So that is sort of the 30,000 foot big push in the fight to save Ash Meadows, is securing that mineral withdrawal. And that's going to take, this is going to take, at least a minimum several months, likely potentially, a year or more in some cases to secure. So we will continue, of course, to be advocating for that and relying on the help of our members to get that over the finish line. Meanwhile, unfortunately, though we had hoped Rover Metals had, perhaps learned their lesson about how problematic this project was, at the end of December, they put together their plan of operations that it was required by the BLM and submitted a draft to the BLM for consideration. That new plan of operations, which we've had a chance to review, would consist of drilling up to 21 boreholes. So they've reduced the number, and they've reduced the depth to 150 feet instead of 300. That being said, you'll notice that this slide is almost identical to the first one I showed with their original project proposal, in large part because all the same concerns are on the table. Several of these borehole sites are still within a few thousand feet of Fairbanks Spring, all of which are located, still very close to the boundary of the refuge, and all of which still have the real potential of intersecting groundwater in a way that could permanently and irreversibly impact the refuge. So our concerns remain exactly the same as they were during the summer. I want to emphasize, though, this is a draft plan of operations. This has not actually been accepted yet by the Bureau of Land Management. The company might have to go through several rounds of revisions to bring that plan up to satisfaction for the BLM before it's processed. But that is going to kick off the NEPA process, meaning the public is going to have an opportunity this time to provide comment, attend informational meetings, and really give the agencies some direction on what they want to see considered as this goes through that process. And that's what we fought really, really hard over the summer to secure, is really the public's opportunity to engage with this project in a way they didn't have before. So that's going to be coming. And I just want to, I'll show a map here quickly. This is what the new project area consists of. You know, they've moved their operations kind of to that western part. The yellow block here is their proposed exploration area. They're now seeking to do all of their drilling in that area. But as you can see, at the bottom of the map shown here is the northern part of the refuge. The proximity here is still just far too close for comfort, in our opinion. But I want to just invite Patrick too to speak a little bit more about that NEPA process and sort of what folks can keep in mind, what we can expect with a project like this.
Yeah, they have filed their plan of operations at this point. So BLM is reviewing that. The next step after BLM accepts the plan of operations, if it's been designated complete, is NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act review. For a project of this size, we would expect an environmental assessment, not an environmental impact statement. That's just the way projects of this size are usually dealt with. It would follow a standard NEPA procedure. So it would start with a 30-day scoping period where people would submit comments suggesting topics that need to be analyzed in the environmental assessment. They would then prepare a draft environmental assessment, which would be issued, 3 to 6 months later for public comment. There'd probably be a 30 to 45-day public comment period for the public to review the environmental assessment and provide substantive comments on it. Then BLM goes back and reviews the comments. They will make adjustments to the environmental assessment based on the comments, and then issue a final environmental assessment and a decision record. So if they choose to move forward with the project, they would issue what's called a finding of no significant impact, a FONSI, and then a decision record authorizing the project. The key question is that they're going to be looking at, and that we will be looking at when we decide whether or not to sue them, which I promise you will. The question is, does the mining exploration project cause what's known as unnecessary or undue degradation of public lands resources, UUD, unnecessary or undue degradation? And the UUD standard is relatively high. You can really mess up some public lands and have it not be considered UUD. However, draining springs at Ash Meadows full of endangered species is definitely going to be UUD. And so, BLM's, what they're going to be hinging their decision on is, does this project cause or present a substantial risk of UUD? And ultimately, if they do approve the project, which we sure as heck hope they won't, we're going to be asking a judge to decide whether or not they made that decision correctly. There are, you got to see an environmental assessment before you can know what you're going to sue over. But ultimately, with these exploration projects, UUD really is the question. And so, that's going to be contingent on not just the sort of not just the administrative record in front of us, but we're also going to be, doing further hydrologic studies. I would suspect that some combination of the Center for Biological Diversity, the Amargosa Conservancy, and others would fund a full hydrologic study of this plan of operations and Rover's exploration project, which would then inform any subsequent litigation. So, the short and skinny of it is BLM's going to tell us, well, we don't really have a whole lot of discretion here. We just need to approve mining projects. And, that's generally what they say in these types of cases. So, the question then becomes, does that approval comport with the law, with the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act, with NEPA, and with the Endangered Species Act? And so, I would say in general, we have a good set of facts here for pushing back on an approval of this project in court.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I mean, clearly this is going to be an extraordinary process for this particular project, given the level of attention. And so there's going to be a lot for us to keep up on, and we will of course provide updates and what we learn as we get closer to that NEPA process, should one come to pass. And so I want to finally just wrap up by really laying out the ways in which, if you're asking, well, how can I help support the AC and our partners in this fight? And here are really the kind of the 4 opportunities on the table to really help make a difference right now. The first, as I mentioned, is to sign that petition. And if you could do us a favor and just share it with a couple of friends and family, ask them to take less than a minute out of their day to sign it. That really can go a long ways towards demonstrating that public support. The second is to get ready to engage in this review process. Again, we're still working on an unknown timeline for that. It could be sometime in the next 6 months. It could be towards the end of the year. We're going to stay on top of it, and of course, we'll provide resources as we get closer for really participating in that process. The third is to stay connected with us. We put out a lot of news and updates just via social media, especially as things move quickly. So that's really the best way to stay on top of the current situation. And then we also put out a monthly newsletter where we try to include updates and continued opportunities for really assisting with this fight. The last, of course, is just supporting our organization through a donation. And again, I want to thank all of our members who really showed up for us this last year, especially in this huge crunch we had. It takes significant resources to wage a fight like this, across the organizing, the communications, the legal frontier. It's a considerable investment, and really it's only because of our members supporting us in this fight that we're able to do it. So that is really one of the probably the most impactful way, is just make sure we have the resources to really fully engage in this fight. So every donation, small or big, one time, recurring, it all really adds up and makes a big difference. And Naomi will drop links in the chat where you can get connected with us through that newsletter, sign up, and make a donation as well. Also, if you don't want to just make a boring standard donation, you want to help raise awareness about the AC and this really important fight to save Ash Meadows, we have a store set up through Bonfire. You can purchase swag with we've got t-shirts, hats, mugs, all kinds of things. And then we receive a portion of the proceeds that go directly towards this fight to save Ash Meadows. So do yourself and us a favor, get some amazing looking swag, help promote this issue, wear it around, tell folks about it, even if they don't ask about it. All of that would really help us out. The last 2 slides I want to leave you with is, this is actually just a full-size screenshot of Fairbanks Spring, where I have spent an inordinate amount of time now the last 10 months. And this is sort of, if you are ever in the Ash Meadows region, absolutely go to the refuge, go to the visitor center, take some walks. I really recommend you go check out Fairbanks Spring, because it really grounds, powerfully, why we're waging this fight, and really how extraordinary and special this landscape is to have, these big cerulean pools of water in one of the hottest and driest deserts on the planet. I just am immensely grateful for this place, and I hope you all can experience it in person someday. And then I'll leave you just with a quote that's really grounded us in this campaign. What's good for the fish is good for the people. And we feel like in this case, the better we can, if we can do right by the refuge, I think we're doing right by ourselves as well. And this mineral withdrawal campaign and the fight against rover metals is what's good for the fish. And I think that's what's also good for the people. So thank you all for hanging out with us tonight for the last 50 minutes or so. This is all the information, ways to get connected with us. And we just want to leave, the rest of our time together, next 10, 15 minutes for questions that you might have out there that we can help answer based on everything we threw at you tonight. So I haven't been looking at the chat. Are there any questions out there, Naomi, that we should respond to?
Patrick has addressed a couple of the questions. If folks have been tracking that, that's great. There is a question right now from Jim Lane, who asks, for the long term, what about monument status for the area?
I think that, we've been holding in view the different paths that could be taken towards a more durable protective status for the region. A monument campaign is certainly one of them, but there are other tactics we could take as well. There are different protected designations under the BLM, national conservation areas being one, wild and scenic river expansion. We have a wild and scenic river for the Amargosa farther south that could be expanded. But I think another option that's really been more in active discussion, not just now, but really over the last decade is, well, maybe we should think about expanding the boundaries of the refuge to encapsulate some of these areas, these extremely sensitive hydrological areas that need to be protected as part of the refuge complex. All of those are potential future pursuits. I think for the time being, the mineral withdrawal, it's throwing a tourniquet on a bleed. Where it's giving us honestly giving us the ability to have those conversations about what needs to come next, what really aligns with our local priorities, the priorities of our tribal partners, what makes sense from a scientific perspective. All of that needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to the future of public lands and Ash Meadows. So we're keeping all the options on the table. And for now, though, we just need to make sure we can keep and protect what we currently have. So the mineral withdrawal is step one towards that path.
There's another question that's come in from Lorraine Washburn. She asks, is this the fact that this is about lithium extraction means that it is a particular risk of being railroaded through at the federal level? How are the Amargosa Conservancy and the center warding this off?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really no secret that the reason, one of the reasons this conflict has been covered in the media at local, regional, and national levels is not only because Ash Meadows is so special and so unique, but also because of course we're currently living and working in an interesting context in which we're trying to make this transition to clean energy, and so certainly that is part of the political ethos, and it could have implications on sort of the future of this particular project. With that being said, I think where we come down is this is really not about the mineral in question. This isn't about mining lithium or krypton or any other mineral, you name it. The issue is just the location. It wouldn't matter what's being extracted here. It's just far too close for comfort to an irreplaceable resource and landscape like Ash Meadows is. And so we're being cognizant that, of course, that's going to be part of the conversation moving forward. We can't really control that. But where we come down is it's just not about the mineral or what that mineral is used for. At the end of the day, there just have to be some places that are off the table when it comes to putting at risk over mineral extraction. And I think the communities of the Amargosa have stood up and said pretty loudly, this is one of them. So that's going to be our position. And Patrick, please feel free to add.
Yeah, I would just say, there are certainly places in the Western United States and in Nevada right now where, yes, BLM and the Biden administration are railroading us to force lithium mines through. This is not one of them. Rover Metals is just barely able to be called a mining company. Like, it's one guy and his buddies, and they have a couple of mineral assay reports and a few mining claims. And as of before this whole mess started, they had about less than $250,000 to their name in total assets. So I mean, you're talking about something that barely qualifies as a mining company. They certainly don't wield extensive political power. Now they have certainly expanded their scope since this controversy started. We actually have reason to believe that the mining industry has been pouring money into Rover Metals because they don't like the fact that locals and environmentalists are teaming up to push back against inappropriate mining. And so we have reason to believe that Rover Metals has been getting juiced by the mining industry. But nonetheless, they are not some major multinational mining company with a lot of political power, influence, and lobbying money that is kind of pushing things through in DC and so forth. It's really a two-bit operator with a deeply unpopular project that nobody wants to see go through. And, I think that dynamic of the political power of lithium at the moment really isn't playing out here in the same way it might be at a place like Thacker Pass or Rhyolite Ridge.
Yeah.
A question has come in about NEPA review. Could that be the death knell to this?
You know, you could count the number of times that BLM's had applicant go through an entire environmental review process and then said no at the end on one hand. It doesn't happen. You know, if you go through the whole process of an environmental review, you're almost certain to get approved. So no, the NEPA review itself won't be the death knell of it. Would a lawsuit following approval of the project over the NEPA be the death knell? You know, maybe. I think the facts at play here, the fact that we have 12 species listed under the Endangered Species Act within a couple thousand feet of this project, and this incredibly sensitive groundwater system that feeds the habitat for those species, you know, that is very compelling facts for a case. And so, you know, I don't see BLM just turning around and saying, well, nope, disapproved, you know, once they go and do an environmental assessment. But I think our stance getting into litigation over it would be very, very strong.
Are we all caught up on questions? All right. Well, hey, thanks again so much, everyone, for just hanging out with us tonight. You know, this is going to be a long and interesting campaign, and you know, we're available to continue to talk through these issues. You know, how we're engaging, and again, we hope we can count on all of you when these high pressure moments, you know, come online for us to act. You know, that's what we're counting on our membership to help us really do and do well. So we will continue to host meetings like this, providing the latest. And Patrick just included his email address. I'll go ahead and drop my direct one into the chat too, although I think it's on the screen there. And just don't be shy about reaching out, because we do this and you know, we're waging this fight full time right now. So we just want to make sure that we're available to talk it through. So thanks everyone again, and hope we can connect with you in person soon, and hope you have a wonderful evening. Oh, I see some questions about the recording. We will send a recording out following the meeting once it's processed, so you'll get a copy of it, and we'll put it on YouTube as well. All right. Thanks, everyone.